The contents of the lab report are meant for educational purposes only. They're not meant to be misconstrued as medical diagnosis or treatment advice.
What kind?
Today, on the lab report, we're going to talk to Dr. Elena Zinkov.
She wrote a great book on cravings.
Cravings? I've got a few of those.
Like what?
Ice cream.
Potato chips.
Bagels.
Cookies.
Lobster?
Huh?
The world of medicine can be challenging. Clinicians and patients are always looking for more options, more effective treatments, and in the end, more answers. Functional and integrative medicine focuses on addressing root causes of disease. Here at Genova Diagnostics, we've watched this field evolve and grow for over 35 years. We've not only adapted, we've led. Join us as we talk about functional medicine, laboratory testing, and optimizing health. Welcome to the Lab Report.
All right. Do you really crave lobster?
No.
What-
Never have.
Why would you say lobster?
I don't know. I don't know why these things come out of my mouth sometimes.
Much like every day here.
Hello.
Hey, Michael Chapman.
Hi, Patty Devers. How are you?
Doing so great today.
Great.
Welcome to the Lab Report.
Welcome, everyone, to this podcast brought to you by Genova Diagnostics. Guess what? We
What?
talk about things like functional medicine, specialty lab testing,
Wow.
integrative therapeutics, and some other stuff called the like.
And if you like what you hear, you should go to iTunes or Spotify and maybe subscribe to this podcast.
Yes.
Rate, review, some stars.
Please do that.
Some feedback.
That would be helpful. That helps us spread the word about the show.
Totally.
Helps improve our overall popularity.
Do we have popularity?
No, never have had any. But there's no time like today. Or like the present, I guess I should
Okay.
say. That's
Okay.
kind of what I was going for.
Okay.
Tough sometimes, these microphones. Anyway, if you have feedback, you can send that feedback to podcast@gdx.net, and we will review your emails. We appreciate all those emails, and the feedback helps create some of the content for the show, too. So thank you.
We love them. Thank you. And today we're going to meet Dr. Elena Zinkov.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. It's always good to have another naturopath in the house.
I'm outnumbered again
2-1. Look out.
every day.
We're going to be talking about naturopathic stuff.
I know. Well, she wrote a really interesting book about how to reset cravings, which is something I think we should all really pay attention to.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this, all the different multifactorial dynamics of cravings. And, we talk a lot about behavior change and how this is behavior change medicine, and cravings are really at the core of dealing with a lot of the struggles with behavior change.
Yeah, and we think that this is seemingly out of our control, but in essence, Dr. Zinkov is going to talk to us about ways to approach this from a functional medicine standpoint.
Sounds good. Let's just go ahead and bring her on.
Great.
Hey, Patty.
Huh.
On today's podcast,
Right.
we have Dr. Elena Zinkov.
Oh, believe me, I know.
Let me tell you a little bit.
Okay.
Dr. Elena Zinkov is a naturopathic physician and founder of Proactive Health, an award-winning integrative clinic. Dr. Elena's view of health is shaped by 20-plus years as a competitive tennis player, where she learned the power of nutrition and fitness as a therapeutic tool. Dr. Zinkov earned a business degree from the University of Washington's Foster School of Business, and soon after, she completed her doctorate in naturopathic medicine from Bastyr University. In her current practice, Proactive Health, she works with patients to address their issues holistically and lay the foundation for sustainable improvements. She's an expert in balancing women's hormones through her signature program called Hormone Potential Therapy. Dr. Zinkov is the author of the book Crave Reset, a breakthrough guide for mastering the psychology and physiology of cravings. She has been featured on numerous podcasts and several national magazines, even being named top naturopathic doctor in both Seattle Met and 425 magazine. So with that,
Welcome, Elena.
welcome to the Lab Report.
Oh, thank you so much, you guys, for having me. It's such a great honor and pleasure.
Awesome. Well, Michael knows, Elena, that I'm a huge tennis fan. So how did being a competitive athlete and a competitive tennis player lead you on the path to naturopathic and functional medicine?
Yeah, that's a great question. As an athlete, I quickly recognized just the importance of the foundations of health. And this is something that we talk a lot about in naturopathic medicine and in functional medicine. What are the foundations of health?
Yeah.
And when you're an athlete, and whether you're a young athlete or a mature athlete, it's really important to focus on performance as a byproduct of your diet, lifestyle, and exercise. And as a competitive athlete, and I played semi-professional tennis, I played in Dietary Academy in Florida, and I played right next to some of the pros that we know of. And we had access to nutritionists, we had access to trainers, we had access to sports psychologists, massage therapists. And in a way, that was my exposure to, to functional training in a sense.
Yeah.
And I always talk about this, but my background as a competitive athlete really shaped my approach to health and really talking to patients about, before we get into some complex things like gut health and hormone health, let's work on that solid foundation.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And part of that foundation too, at least in functional medicine, is about people's behavior, what they're doing, what their choices are around diet. And that can be difficult for a lot of patients for reasons that they believe maybe sometimes it's not in their control. And you actually wrote the book Crave Reset, which hit this topic straight on. So let's get into a little bit of the physiology of cravings and some of the root causes we should be considering as it relates to cravings.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I like for people to know when it comes to cravings is that a lot of times it's not just a matter of willpower. And I hear patients talk about this, and at some point in time, we all have experienced this, both men and women, where the craving is so strong that it's almost beyond us, right?
Right.
And when that happens, it's like, why can't I just put that chocolate bar down? Why can't I just say no to that second slice of pizza?
Right.
Why do I have such a strong craving for sugar that I must have something? And when that happens, we have to take the naturopathic or functional approach to cravings, which means looking at the body as a whole, looking at symptoms as a byproduct of how all the different systems are working together to produce that craving. And so even in the book Crave Reset, I really talk about brain health and the importance of having healthy neurotransmitter levels that can regulate our cravings, gut health, and how our microbiome shapes our cravings. And then, of course, hormone health and stress and lifestyle as things that can also influence our cravings. And that's not really conventional for people to think about when people think of cravings. They're like, well, of course, I'm just like craving chocolate, I'm just craving ice cream. What I think the majority, maybe 90% of the population, don't realize that those cravings are shaped by all of these different systems in our body.
That's fascinating. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people, when we think about cravings, it's like, oh, this is something that occurs top down. This is my brain,
right.
And some sort of imbalance in my neurochemistry. So I think it's interesting. Let's talk a little bit about some of these elements that you laid out. So what specific hormone imbalances, how does hormone imbalance contribute to cravings?
Right. And this is where really naturopathic and functional medicine comes into place, because whenever we're having a hormonal imbalance, and really the main hormones that I think about when I'm thinking about food cravings, it's adrenal glands, including cortisol, thyroid, and then sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And classically, whenever people are burnt out and they're producing either too much cortisol or they're not producing enough cortisol, they'll crave sugar. And with a thyroid hormone, with thyroid hormone imbalances, such as an underfunctioning thyroid gland, people can crave both sugar and salt. And same thing with the adrenal glands. So they kind of go back and forth. And a classic example with low progesterone levels in women, which can happen around the cycle time, women will start to crave chocolate and savory things. So there are a number of hormones, including adrenal, thyroid, and sex hormones, that can contribute to cravings for sugar, salty, and savory foods.
Interesting. Which it makes it important to really take a look at that HPA axis first in functional medicine. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And it's actually a really easy thing to do. So a lot of times when patients come to me and they're like, I don't feel well, I'm feeling tired, I'm not sleeping very well. And then I look at their dietary tracker and I'm seeing, that they're starting their morning with a piece of toast, then they're having a sandwich for lunch, and they're having some dark chocolate between lunch and dinner just to keep their energy up. So they become really dependent on carbohydrates to keep their blood sugar stable. And then when we look at their blood work and we're seeing, their T3 is a little bit on the low end, right? Their cortisol is maybe either through the roof or too low. And then it becomes this whole picture where they're like, that's interesting that my cravings are being guided by the physiology of hormones.
Right, right. Well, what about specific nutritional deficiencies? Can, having a functional deficiency in any specific nutrient trigger cravings?
Absolutely. Some common examples, and I'll actually kind of tie this into a little bit of the neurotransmitter component, but a lot of nutrient deficiency, specifically B12, vitamin D, iron, and magnesium, can really contribute to some major cravings. The reason why vitamin B12 and vitamin D are so important, and a lot of times we're kind of going into the fall, winter season, and even in the spring and summers, people start to smother themselves with sunblock. We're not getting that same sun exposure that we want, that we need in order to have the proper vitamin D absorption. But why B12 and vitamin D are so important is that they contribute to serotonin production. And serotonin is one of the most important neurotransmitters that regulates our cravings, specifically around sugar. And we're dealing with, that's the other pandemic, is the dependency on sugar, which results in all sorts of metabolic disease, including diabetes and cardiovascular issues. And when we have B12 or vitamin D deficiencies, which leads to serotonin depletion, then guess what? Then we start reaching more for sugary, sweet things that can help to produce that serotonin, can kind of help with that little serotonin spike.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's interesting. And, another facet that you talk about in your book is the microbiome. And here at Genova, one of our flagship products is the GI-FX stool test. And we know that diet can dramatically affect the microbiome. So what are some concepts that correlate or relate the microbiome and dysbiosis to what foods a person might crave?
So first of all, I love the GI-FX test. I am the number one fan.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you for saying that. That's awesome.
I have to say, you guys, that you've done such a great job with that test, because I'm just going to go on a tangent and just talk about how amazing this test is. Because,
go ahead.
I use it every single day in my practice. And, I sometimes see like 14 patients per day, and most of them, have completed a GI-FX test. But you guys have done such a great job with making it easy to interpret for patients and physicians, and with nice diagrams showing where people are in terms of different cohorts, and understanding really the different imbalances from enzymes to bacteria to parasites to yeast overgrowth. And then you also provide a solution, right, for how to fix those things. And so it is by far one of the best tests. And I always tell people, you're going to know more about what's inside of you than you ever imagined.
Awesome. What a commercial. Thank you.
Yeah, that was...
well, this is just coming from the heart. And I know a lot of my patients just really appreciate the in-depth analysis. But our microbiome, so I talked about how, even as an athlete, I realized the importance of diet. And whenever we're even thinking of cravings, we want to make sure that we're reducing processed carbohydrate intake, because the more of those carbohydrates we eat, that affects our microbiome. And so we're actually feeding different bacteria species that are then saying and producing chemicals, hey, eat more carbohydrates.
Right.
And that's what a lot of people are noticing. And again, we've all gone through this, where the more carbs we eat, the more carbs we crave. The more sugar you eat, the more sugar you crave, and so on and so forth. And so the cool thing is that our microbiome can change within 24 to 48 hours, right?
Yep.
And that's why I'm such a huge proponent of let your next snack, let your next meal being a new moment. It's a fresh start, because we are voting with our forks, and whenever we make the decision to eat better, to fuel better, that already within 24 to 48 hours, it's going to be easier for us to start making better decisions, because it's already shaping a different microbiome.
Right.
Yeah, that's
like
super
that.
interesting. It reminds me of this phrase that I've always heard along the way is that like it's the concept of who's really in control,
Right.
based on the food cravings. Is it,
Yeah.
am I in control, or is it the microbiome that's really
That's
telling me
right.
what to eat?
Oh, you are on point with that because, what I like about the Genova test is it's almost evidence for people for why they're sometimes feeling the way that they're feeling, right? It's evidence for why they're having the hormone imbalance. It's evidence for why they're bloated. It's evidence for why they're making why they're making the certain food decisions. Because if someone is like, oh my gosh, well, sugar is just like my thing, and we see that they have candida overgrowth happening in their gut, well, for sure, that yeast, that fungus, it's hungry,
Right. Right. Yeah.
and it's going to want you to have a higher carbohydrate diet to stay alive. And you guys bring up a solid point, which is it us? Is it me? Is it in my head? Or is it my microbiome? Because the microbiome actually doesn't care so much about you. It just wants it to be fed, right? It's us versus them. There's more gut bacteria than there are cells in our body. So they're very opportunistic. And at any point, they want to take over.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And even, earlier you were talking a little bit about neurotransmitters and we were talking about nutrition, but it makes sense to anyone that your neurotransmitters or neurotransmitter imbalances can contribute to cravings. But in your book, Crave Reset, you spoke about GABA and dopamine receptors. Can you elaborate on the receptor part of that as well?
Absolutely. And I'll even talk a little bit about the genetic component as it relates to dopamine, because it's a big problem. And so serotonin and dopamine, we can't talk about those two without talking about serotonin, because it's kind of like the god of neurotransmitters. Right. So serotonin and dopamine, they work together. So whenever you're eating something that is that you have a craving for, in a sense, you're telling your body, okay, this feels really good. So serotonin, the reason why cravings can be really addicting is because it just feels good. Right? You get that serotonin spike that feels good. And what happens is that then dopamine comes around and says, hey, this is really good. Let's solidify this behavior. Right? And so dopamine is the neurotransmitter that then solidifies that behavior and habit. So that's why serotonin and dopamine, they work really well together. The thing with GABA, actually, I should talk about the genetic component of dopamine since we're talking about dopamine. There's a number of people, and again, this is not just a matter of willpower, who may have a genetic mutation and don't produce enough of the dopamine receptors. And what can happen is that then you need more of the things. You crave more sugar, you crave more fat, you crave more of the savory things, because you are never satisfied, right? Because both serotonin and dopamine, they provide a satisfying response in the body. And that's why, and there's of course a solution to it. Some people are hearing this, they're like, oh, I probably have a dopamine receptor mutation.
Right.
Here, honey, here's proof. This is why I can eat all the ice cream in the world.
No, you're talking about proof. Me.
Yeah, Michael.
Everybody's going to go to their partners today and say, I swear I have a dopamine receptor mutation Dr. Elena talked about. And we can kind of get into, well, there's ways that we can, genetics doesn't mean that that's our fate, right? There's things that we can do. There's things that we can do from dietary, exercise, lifestyle perspective to correct those things. But GABA is really interesting. So typically, and as physicians, we know that when GABA receptors are activated in the brain, they create a very soothing effect. It's an anti-anxiolytic. So it can soothe anxiety. And what is the number one thing that people go to when they're stressed, when they're anxious, when they've just come back home from a really stressful day? What just takes that edge off of things? Alcohol.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
A glass of wine or two, a glass or a bottle of beer or a can of beer or whatever. And so that is a slippery slope for a lot of people because they cannot relax unless they have something that takes the edge off of things. Cigarettes, marijuana, all of those things can become easily addicting. And it's mostly because of that dopamine and GABA interaction. Pleasurable behavior, activating GABA, to reduce anxiety and the feeling of stress. And that's why those things can become so highly addicting.
Interesting. And then you're talking a little bit about, how you can take every single moment to make a change and start your kind of new path. What are some actionable steps that patients can take to kind of reprogram their dietary choices?
Yeah, absolutely. The number one thing is, let's get rid of the things in our diet that don't serve us.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the number one step, is cleaning up your diet. And that means removing processed carbohydrates, including, for some folks who've been eating a lot of processed carbohydrates, it doesn't mean go grain free. I'm actually not against grains.
Mm-hmm.
They can actually serve a really nice bridge between eating a poor diet and then incorporating a little bit of grains, as to help along the way while you're modifying your diet.
Mm-hmm.
And then getting rid of processed sugar. I'm a huge proponent of finding sweetness in our lives in healthy ways. And that could be, instead of eating sugar through a candy bar, it's eating maybe a couple dates with peanut butter.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that you will frequently hear me talk about is pairing carbohydrates with protein. Because a lot of people are just walking around, they have like a brown rice cracker. Oh, that's healthy. A little did they know they're going to be hungry after 5 minutes.
Right.
Once they have that, they just have a toast with butter. Well, you're going to be hungry within like 10 minutes of having that. And so I always tell my patients, okay, if you're going to have an apple, have like a tablespoon of cashew butter with that. If you're going to have a brown rice cracker, have like half of an avocado. If you're going to have cucumber slices and carrots, have some hummus with it, right? So we're just kind of pairing good sources of protein and fat. And so the number one thing is really do a dietary tracker on your own. Fill out, track your diet for 3 to 4 days, see your timing of your meals, what you're eating, monitor your mood, your energy, and any gut symptoms, and make that adjustment, right? If you're finding that you're eating something for breakfast and it makes you feel bloated, maybe that's not the best food for you, right? Maybe it's time to introduce maybe something like some gluten-free oats, or maybe it's, introducing some eggs or whatever it is. But the number one thing is really cleaning up our diet, incorporating more vegetables, higher food items, cutting back on the sugar. Sometimes when people say, well, I'm cleaning up my diet, I'm eating like 4 servings of fruit per day. I'm like, well, how about we make 2 servings of fruit per day, right? Because people are thinking, well, this is better than a donut. I'm like, it still has a lot of sugar.
That's right.
So it's really, there's that education component of eliminating processed foods and incorporating more whole foods, but not losing sight of, we're human and we want sweetness, right? We want sweets. And it's just finding alternatives. In my own journey of kind of beating sugar cravings, I just started to look for healthier sugar alternatives. So in my book, I start out, I think one of the first chapters, like, I used to love carrot cake. Like that was my thing, and after quitting tennis and going into triathlons, like I was like, oh, I can get away with this.
Right.
I can get away with eating a carrot cake.
That's right.
But I had acne and I was bloated and I was super depressed and unhappy with myself. I'm like, you know what, this thing is not working out. And so, even in my own journey, it was like, okay, like a couple dates is better than eating a slice of carrot cake.
Mm-hmm.
A couple dates paired with some cashews is much better, right?
Right.
You're getting the satisfaction from getting something sweet, but then you're getting a good source of fat and protein.
Yeah.
So those are a couple examples. So I really think that just the diet is the first place to start, and making sure that you're pairing your carbohydrates with your protein. So
that's great.
And the other thing I love about what you were just saying and alluding to is, like, at the end of the day, you also have to listen to your body. And your body will tell you, what things are working and not working. And I think that's such an a misunderstood or underrepresented way to approach dietary changes also.
Yeah, I really want people to start making a connection, with the food choices that they make. How is this making them feel? And the other thing I would say is, there's things like intermittent fasting or time restricted eating, and then there's skipping meals, right? So when you're skipping, and those are 2 really different categories. when you're skipping meals, your blood sugar is all over the place and you're more likely to make a mistake, right? When you're in time restricted eating or intermittent fasting, your body is aware that there's a program in place, right? It gets used to a certain rhythm. It's not, it knows when the next meal is going to come. It has a way of getting in sync and of helping you regulate your blood sugar. And that's kind of a separate conversation with time restricted eating and hormone imbalances and things like that. But in a way, it's the other thing is like whenever you're making the dietary change, so we have to take into consideration that sugar is sometimes an addiction, right? And even in my practice, I pull people off of sugar, cigarettes, caffeine, alcohol so frequently that fasting is like intermittent fasting is not the time to incorporate it when you're working through an addiction, for example, right? We actually want to have more frequent meals. We want to tell our body, hey, it's okay. Let's keep our blood sugar stable. And then when the person feels good, they're more comfortable with making good decisions around food, when they have a good relationship with food, that's when we kind of start jumping into more of the fancier stuff like the time restricted eating.
Right. That's true. Well, earlier you talked about your absolute love for the GI effects, which we appreciate. Do you use other testing when it comes to your patients, like things like nutritional testing or even hormonal testing?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few things that I use. So I use the 3-hour SIBO test.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And typically, the common thing with SIBO is patients will usually wake up feeling bloated, or they feel very bloated in the evening or at nighttime. And sometimes if I do the GI effect, and I'm a conservative test prescriber, I don't think that patients need to have like 4 tests out of the door, because it can be, it's a lot of work for the physicians, but then it's very overwhelming for the patient. So I like to start out with a diet and then start with a GI effects test. And then if the symptoms don't improve after treatment, post GI effects review, then I'll sometimes jump into the SIBO test and see what happens. I'm also a huge proponent of the Nutra-Eval test by Genova. And the reason for that, and I haven't seen another test as good as that on the market. The reason for that, again, you're going to know more about your brain health and nutrient deficiencies than you've ever anticipated. But that's part of us understanding cravings, right? Are we producing enough of those neurotransmitters? And that the Nutra-Eval test really looks at the metabolites of those neurotransmitters and metabolites of different vitamins and nutrients to help us better understand what the patient is nutrient deficient in, or even neurotransmitter deficient in, or maybe too much.
Right.
So those are the main tests that I would say is the GI effects, the SIBO, and the Nutra-Eval. I'm a huge proponent also of the salivary testing for hormones as well, and even the urine testing.
That's great.
Great.
Well, a little bit of change in topic. Given your sports background, do you oftentimes work with athletes? Do you do much in the way of optimizing sports performance?
Oh, absolutely. And I would say more so in the last couple of years. So just an interesting fact about me, actually, when I quit tennis, I actually dove pretty heavy duty into mountain climbing. And I did everything. I did rock climbing, alpine climbing, ice climbing, mountaineering, mixed alpine climbing, all of those things. And it was kind of my outlet, right? So mountains became my outlets and my refuge. And it was really interesting. So I became really involved in the climbing community, and it became really interesting. So after I became a physician and practiced for a number of years, then a lot of climbers, and actually professional climbers, started to come to me to help optimize their nutrition. They're actually very young athletes, like 16, 17. And I do actually work with some professional athletes. I work with professional climbers. I work with professional soccer players, because there's such a need for not just nutrition optimization, but hormonal optimization and digestive care, and improving our digestion. And so I have athletes who will come in and, well, these days it's virtual, but, we'll have a conversation that they're just burnt out.
Yeah.
Right? They're not running as fast. They're not performing as well. They're feeling tired. They're feeling bloated. I have women professional soccer players who just don't feel like themselves. They have acne. They feel like they could lose 10 pounds. And it's so hard for them because these guys, they're exercising for hours every single day. And conventional medicine just hasn't answered their question of, why am I gaining weight when I'm a professional athlete?
Right.
Why do I have acne when I have a professional chef cook meals for me? Right?
Uh-huh.
Like, why are these things happening? So I'm really helping these athletes optimize their nutrition, their hormones, and their digestive care.
Cool.
Great.
Well, on our show, we talk a lot about diets, different kinds of diet, keto, carnivore, Mediterranean, plant-based. When you're working with your athletes or just in general, is there a specific diet that you think is optimal for optimizing someone's performance?
I like a mixed paleo diet.
Okay.
And the reason for that is I'm not against legumes. And I'm not against grains, but I think that they should be used in moderation, right? And so, especially when I'm working with athletes, it is hard to just go off of keto, for example, because you need sometimes that quick fuel, such as you get from carbohydrates, right, and glycogen stores.
Right.
I don't mind it when we need to maybe optimize our weight. So sometimes we'll do a little bit lower carb diet. But the reason why I like paleo is because it kind of takes the inflammatory foods out, right? Like the dairy and the gluten, and a lot of people have sensitivities to legumes and to grains. So it helps us just to kind of clean up our diet. And people nowadays, they know kind of what paleo is. So it's really easy to say, like, eat paleo, and then maybe every other day have like a serving of grains or legumes, right? Or just kind of like sprinkle it on the salad. And the reason why I like that kind of mixed paleo is because it doesn't feel constraining or restraining for people. It gives people a little bit of wiggle room. And it's easier to kind of apply it to your everyday lifestyle.
Nice.
Got it. And you talked earlier a little bit about time-restricted feeding and intermittent fasting. Do you do any more prolonged fasts in your clinic, or recommend that to a particular patient population, or just in general?
I do like time-restricted eating. I do like when we do fast for about 14 to 16 hours. And I know that there's been a lot of research that shows really the metabolic improvements and cancer prevention really happens at 16 hours and beyond. And I don't really recommend longer fasts. I think they need to be, for those fasts, we really need to be in a healthy place and a healthy state of being. I think very few people can actually handle longer fasts than that. And I really try to work on the foundations of health first, like the diet part, help people balance their hormones, make sure that they're eliminating on a daily basis, and then bring the time restricted eating into place. Having said that though, there are times when my patients will come to me and they'll say, hey, you know what? I actually feel really good when one day a week I do a 24-hour fast.
Yeah.
And they do feel great because through time restricted eating, they've become more fat adapt and they actually feel great. They don't even have cravings for food. They don't have cravings for coffee. They have clarity. They feel so energized. So I will support the patients. So when in their goal, right? And I also will tell people, like, if you're feeling really just not well, if your energy is not there, if you're not sleeping well, that's not the time to fast. That's not the time to really bring fasting into equation. But once you're comfortable with doing like a 14, 16, 18-hour fast, then hey, you're ready for that 24-hour fast. But it's not like something that, a patient comes in, I'm like, we're going to do some 24-hour fast,
right.
you guys.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Well, this has been a really great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on, Dr. Elena. I'm going to say that we have one additional question that we call the fireball question that we ask everyone, and we surprise them with this. So I'm
it, you guys. Bring it.
I'm going to turn this one over to Patty because she's the fanatic over here.
I know. Well, I know you no longer play tennis, Elena, but there's the age-old question of camps, and I'm going to ask you to choose a lane between Federer or Nadal.
You know what? I'm going to choose Nadal.
Wow.
See, I'll tell you, Michael said, Patty, everyone's going to pick Federer. This is a stupid question.
I did. I thought this was like a slam dunk question. I'm blown
See,
away.
Michael, I told you. People are very polarized by this.
Well, I was going more the Agassi Sampras route too, but which is a whole different conversation. But yeah.
Well, what's your answer? What's your answer there? Agassi or Sampras?
Sampras.
Oh, good. Okay, good. We love it.
I love his playing style, and Nadal. He's just, I mean, of course they're both amazing. Nadal, but Nadal, he has so much power and passion.
Yeah.
For the sport, and I appreciate the athleticism that he brings.
That's great. Well, Dr. Elena Zinkov, this has been an amazing amount of information, and we're so thankful that you came on the show. We're going to encourage everyone to check out your website, Proactive Health, and see all the amazing things you're doing there. To check out your book, Crave Reset, a breakthrough guide for mastering the psychology and physiology of cravings. And we can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Thank you, you guys. It's been such a pleasure, and I hope that this benefits many.
Yeah. Take care. I'm starting to think that the reason you crave bagels so badly is that you have this dopamine receptor genetic abnormality that Dr. Zinkov was talking about.
One of many, I'm sure, genetic abnormalities. But I will say that I overcame.
You did.
And
it's a story
using
of triumph.
naturopathic methods, I was able to overcome the cravings.
I'm so proud of you.
For bagels. And here I am.
See, you didn't even need Dr. Zinkov's book, but I think I do. I really think it's an interesting approach to really take control of things that you think are out of your control.
Why don't you pick up 2 copies? Because I have some other cravings that I need to work on.
That's a deal.
Okay. Next time on the Lab Report, we're going to rearrange the furniture.
You do know this is an audio-only show.
Oh, it's going to sound totally different.
You've been listening to the Lab Report. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to our podcast, rate us, and leave us a review. To learn more about Genova Diagnostics, visit our website at gdx.net. There you'll find information on specific testing, educational resources, and how to connect with our show. Call us at 1-800-522-4762 or email us at podcast@gdx.net.
Great. Now I want some barbecue potato chips.
And I want a bagel.
What kind of potato chips do you like?
I'm a fan of the salt and vinegar potato chips.
Really?
Yes.
I took you more for a sour cream and onion guy.
No. Get out of here with the green bag. I need the blue bag.